Okay, so next thing we look at in attachment is a concept called the strange situation. Now, this was a series of experiments designed by Ainsworth. You've got a picture of her here. Ainsworth is named on the spec, so you need to know that when we talk about Ainsworth, we're talking about the strange situation. So what Ainsworth wanted to do was to find a way to measure attachment behaviours in children to assess the quality of attachments between children and their caregiver. So Ainsworth designed this kind of really famous setup of experiments that tried to determine the attachment of a child through observing their behaviour. So the strange situation, it makes more sense if you watch it. So I've linked a video here where you can watch what happens in the strange situation. But what is going on is there's 8 episodes, or there's 8 different sections of the experiment. And what is happening is the infant is being observed in response to 3 separate things. What happens when they're separated from their caregiver? So that's an observation of separation anxiety. What happens when they are reunited with their caregiver? So that's reunion behavior. And what happens if they are left with a stranger or they see a stranger? And that's stranger anxiety. So the infants are being observed on these 3 categories. So separation anxiety, reunion behavior, and stranger anxiety. And they're being observed every 15 seconds. And the observers are scoring them on a scale of 1 to 7 in 5 different behavioural categories. And what the observers did through doing a series of these experiments is come up with 3 separate categories for the attachment of children. So these 3 attachment types. Now, they're sometimes referred to as type A, B, and C, or they have names. You just need to try to remember which one is which, and I'll kind of explain to you how I remember them. So securely attached is type B. So these are children that are willing to explore. They had stranger anxiety, but their mother could calm them down, and they were really pleased to see her again. So these are securely attached children. So these are type B. And then you've got 2 types of insecure attachment. You've got insecure avoidant, which is type A, and insecure resistant, which is type C. Now, I remember that as insecure avoidant is A for avoidant, so that's insecure avoidant. So they were willing to explore, they weren't really fussed about strangers, and they avoided their mother when they came back. Insecure resistant, I remember that they're quite clingy, so that's how I remember it's type C. So they're unwilling to explore, they had high stranger anxiety, they're distressed, and they're distressed still when their parent comes back. They'll go to their parent, but they'll still act distressed. So they're very kind of clingy, so that's type C. So securely attached is type B, insecure avoidant is type A, insecure resistant is type C. Now, what Ainsworth found was that most children are type B, so they're securely attached. And then you had around 22% that were type C, so insecure resistant, and about 12% that were type A, insecure avoidant. Just to point out, there's a typo on my original PowerPoint. That's my fault, where type C and type A are labelled incorrectly. So most children are type B, and then you've got some type C and then some type A. What Ainsworth concluded was that attachment dependent on how sensitive a mother was to what was going on with the child. So that's a sensitive responsiveness we've talked about before. Sensitive mothers tended to have infants who were securely attached. Mothers that tended to ignore their infant or kind of lost their temper with them were more likely to have insecurely attached infants. And that it is the reaction they get from their caregiver that does influence the type of attachment an infant can have. So that's what Ainsworth concluded from her experiments. In terms of AO3, I've elaborated some AO3 points for you. So you can say that there's predictive validity of strange situation. This links to this continuity hypothesis that Bowlby suggested, that your attachments in childhood can affect your attachments later on in life. So there's an elaborated point here. If you remember, there's also elaborated AO3 points in your textbook. You could also say that strange situation has high inter-rater reliability. Most of the observers agreed on the behaviour that they were observing in children. So it's a reliable method of deciding on attachment types. A big limitation is strange situation is culture bound. We'll look at cultural variations next. you can argue that it's ethnocentric, that it demonstrates an alpha culture bias, but we'll look at this next time. And then you could also say that Ainsworth didn't control for confounding variables such as the temperament of children, and this could have affected the results of her study. It's a really common thing asked about in the exam because Ainsworth is named. And what AQA like to do is give you scenarios where they describe the behaviour of children in a certain situation. And like on the slide here, they ask you what type of attachment that child tends to have. So that's something you need to practice. Look at different scenarios and establish whether that child is kind of type A, type B, or type C, whether they're insecure avoidant, whether they're securely attached, or whether they're insecure resistant. So that's the most common type of exam question that you tend to get for strange situation.